in first grade, when the teacher used to read the story to you and you just sat there and you were entertained. That is not what we are doing here. What we are doing here is rather focusing on our reading improvement, beginning, of course, with our fluidity. Can you keep up with the reader all the way? Also, that will help you to concentrate and focus. However, be taking notes as well. And as we find out what each stage is, just write down by simply asking, what is the struggle, the fight, the monster that our heroine, not hero, heroine, Phoenix Jackson encounters on her way through the woods. And then finally, we're going to ask this question. Why is she taking this journey? What is the point? Like, is she got some major award or something she's going to get at the end of this thing? What is going on? Let's get a sense of it. Right away, by the way, pay attention to the way that Eudora Welty will describe Phoenix Jackson, right? She was very old. I'm 4 lines down. Do you see it? Small. She walked slowly in the dark pine shadows, moving a little from side to side in her steps with the balanced heaviness and lightness of a pendulum in a grandfather clock. What an amazing word picture already. She carried a thin, small cane made from an umbrella, and with this she kept tapping the frozen earth in front of her. She wore a dark striped dress reaching down to her shoe tops, equally long apron. Her eyes were blue with age. I'm skipping. Her skin had a pattern all its own of numberless branching wrinkles. Wow. So let's pay attention to the way that Eudora Welty will describe our character of Phoenix Jackson. All right, let's read together now. Pay attention. Really concentrate.
A Worn Path by Eudora Welty. It was December, a bright frozen day in the early morning. Far out in the country, there was an old Negro woman with her head tied in a red rag, coming along a path through the pine woods. Her name was Phoenix Jackson. She was very old and small, and she walked slowly in the dark pine shadows, moving a little from side to side in her steps, with the balanced heaviness and lightness of a pendulum in a grandfather clock. She carried a thin, small cane made from an umbrella, and with this she kept tapping the frozen earth in front of her. This made a grave and persistent noise in the still air that seemed meditative, like the chirping of a solitary little bird. She wore a dark striped dress reaching down to her shoe tops, and an equally long apron of bleached sugar sacks with a full pocket, all neat and tidy. But every time she took a step, she might have fallen over her shoelaces, which dragged from her unlaced shoes. She looked straight ahead. Her eyes were blue with age. Her skin had a pattern all its own of numberless branching wrinkles, and as though a whole little tree stood in the middle of her forehead. But a golden color ran underneath, and the 2 knobs of her cheeks were illumined by a yellow burning under the dark. Under the red rag, her hair came down on her neck in the frailest of ringlets, still black and with an odor like copper. Now and then there was a quivering in the thicket. Old Phoenix said, "Out of my way, all you foxes, owls, beetles, jackrabbits, coons, and wild animals. Keep out from under these feet, little bob whites. Keep the big wild hogs out of my path. Don't let none of those come running my direction. I got a long way." Under her small, black-freckled hand, her cane, limber as a buggy whip, would switch at the bush as if to rouse up any hiding things. On she went. The woods were deep and still. The sun made the pine needles almost too bright to look at up where the wind rocked. The cones dropped as light as feathers. Down in the hollow was the mourning dove. It was not too late for him. The path ran up a hill. "Seem like there is chains about my feet, time I get this far," she said, in the voice of argument old people keep to use with themselves. Something always take a hold of me on this hill. Pleads I should stay. After she got to the top, she turned and gave a full, severe look behind her where she had come. Up through pines, she said at length. Now down through oaks.
All right, let's pause for a moment. Level 1, just jot it down. 2 observations. 1, notice the descriptions of Phoenix Jackson. Right? Very pointed descriptions. A couple of things maybe that you noticed that were specific. Notice, for example, she has unlaced shoes. So when she walks, she has to be careful she doesn't fall because of her laces. Question, why doesn't she tie her shoes? Answer, this is a way to say how old she is, right? So maybe she can't so easily lean over anymore. It's a funny thing. Students sometimes don't think about this. What you start to lose as you become really, really old. For example, maybe she can't tie her shoes anymore or have somebody to tie them for her. Right? Also notice that in her face she has so many wrinkles. And these wrinkles kind of start to look like a tree, an old tree. Of course, this will be symbolic because what is she about to do? Walk through a woods of what? A forest of lots of old trees. You got it, you got it. So off she goes on her walk. She is, of course, going to talk out loud to herself. She's going to as well have her little cane as she walks. She's telling all the potential animals that might bug her, stay out of my way. What's the first obstacle? See, notice how subtle this is. What's the first obstacle? She's got to do what? Right, she's got to climb a hill, doesn't she? And she looks up the hill. She, of course, has done this journey many times, and she goes, man, my feet feel like they got chains on them. Significant, of course, for any number of pieces of symbolism as well, because Phoenix Jackson is, of course, black, right? And so her lineage will probably have been through slaves who literally had chains on their feet. She doesn't have chains on her feet literally anymore, but she says, I feel like I got chains on my feet as she goes up the first obstacle, which is nothing more than a hill. She's going through a bunch of trees. When she gets to the top of the hill, she looks and realizes, now I got to go through more trees. Do you understand now how we're reading the story? So pay attention to the stages, to the obstacles. It's going to be very, very subtle. It's not going to be so obvious the way it, for example, was when you read Homer's Odyssey, where it's so obvious what the next great battle is or great obstacle is. All right, let's keep reading. Again, really challenge yourself to pay close attention as you read.
Her eyes opened their widest, and she started down gently. But before she got to the bottom of the hill, a bush caught her dress. Her fingers were busy and intent, but her skirts were full and long, so that before she could pull them free in one place, they were caught in another. It was not possible to allow the dress to tear. "Ah, in the thorny bush," she said. "Thorns? You do in your appointed work. Never want to let folks pass, no, sir. Old Eyes thought you was a pretty little green bush." Finally, trembling all over, she stood free, and after a moment dared to stoop for her cane. "Sun so high," she cried, leaning back and looking while the thick tears went over her eyes. "The time getting all gone here." At the foot of this hill was a place where a log was laid across the creek.
Uh-oh, another trial.
"Now comes the trial," said Phoenix. Putting her right foot out, she mounted the log and shut her eyes. Lifting her skirt, leveling her cane fiercely before her like a festival figure in some parade, she began to march across. Then she opened her eyes, and she was safe on the other side. "I wasn't as old as I thought," she said. But she sat down to rest. She spread her skirts on the bank around her and folded her hands over her knees. Up above her was a tree in a pearly cloud of mistletoe. She did not dare to close her eyes, and when a little boy brought her a plate with a slice of marble cake on it, she spoke to him. "That would be acceptable," she said. But when she went to take it, there was just her own hand in the air.
She's imagining, right?
So she left that tree and had to go through a barbed wire fence. There she had to creep and crawl, spreading her knees and stretching her fingers like a baby trying to climb the steps. But she talked loudly to herself. She could not let her dress be torn now, so late in the day, and she could not pay for having her arm or her leg sawed off if she got caught fast where she was. At last she was safe through the fence and risen up out in the clearing. Big dead trees, like black men with one arm, were standing in the purple stalks of the withered cornfield.
Did you notice, and now obviously we're challenging you to read very, very closely, as she goes through these obstacles, these trials, these challenges, notice how subtle they are. A bush she has to navigate, that's a thorn bush. A log she has to walk across, and she has to, she's old, so she has to try and keep her balance. She has to go under a barbed wire fence and pray that she doesn't. Of course, she's crawling as she does that. Look at the bottom of page 851. I just want to point out, if you learn how to read closely, you can begin to appreciate the genius of great writing. Take a look at last she was saved, like 850. It's almost like an Odyssean accomplishment. She's come through maybe blinding Polyphemus, the one-eyed giant, and making it off of the land of the Cyclops. At last, she was safe through the fence and, did you read it? Risen up, out in the clearing. Now, of course, quite literally, all that means is she crawled through on her hands and knees to get through the fence, and then she stood up. But if you know what Phoenix means, and she's named Phoenix Jackson, right? You have some realization that Welty is playing very interesting games here. Finally, in your notes, put this down. Notice the referencing to trees. Over and over again. We have trees on her face and her wrinkles. We have trees that she will identify as different types, pines and oak. We have trees that she has to walk through. We have trees that she sits under. Notice that she's tired, and so she imagines when she sits down that she's going to be offered something like a piece of cake, and she reaches out. Of course, this will remind us of the land of the lotus eaters that Odysseus' men met, where if they ate from the lotus, they would not want to leave the island. It's basically they were stoned all the time. They were in a mental state of great joy and peace, and that would basically, for them, make it like they didn't want to leave anymore. She reaches out, and it's not there, right? So in other words, we're playing obvious games as well as we go through this experience, right? And then, top of page 851. Let's go ahead and pause for just a moment and look over on 851. Do you see the hero's quest there? Now, we've obviously talked about this, but let's see how your textbook company is going to address it. Read with me on 851. The hero's quest. A worn path tells of Phoenix Jackson's quest to get medicine for her grandson. We'll go ahead and give it away there. The purpose is Phoenix Jackson is going through the woods to get some medicine for her grandson. Okay? One of the oldest archetypal forms, the quest plot, appears in poetry and folk tales throughout the world. The Odyssey, as we've mentioned, an epic poem that was likely composed by the Greek poet Homer in the 8th century BC, is one of the most famous examples of the quest plot. The Odyssey tells of the voyage of the Greek warrior Odysseus. After the Trojan War, Odysseus loads his ships and sails for home, where his family awaits him on the island of Ithaca. The voyage turns out to be longer and harder than expected, 10 years longer. Powerful winds blow the ship off course, and Odysseus lands on a series of islands where he encounters frightening giants, monsters, cannibals, beautiful witches, seductive goddesses. These are the obstacles that Odysseus must overcome before reuniting with his family on Ithaca. Okay. As we now turn to the story, again, we want to keep in mind this idea of the journey motif and the challenges. But as I have already pointed out, these challenges for Phoenix Jackson are way more subtle. They're way more sophisticated, and you have to begin to kind of appreciate what actually is going on. Now, we've already been told, so let's put it in our notes. We've answered the question at level 1, what's going on here? She's taking this journey, what? Because she needs some good exercise and she's an old woman? No. Because she's bored and she likes to get out and go for walks? No. We're going to find out she has somebody she loves who needs help. And she will have to help that somebody. try to save his life. We'll come back to the story. Let's take a little break, and then we'll come back to continue our reading. Thank you.